Welcome. We will start in just a couple minutes as we wait more people to come. It's just on the hour, but welcome everyone. And if you like, while folks are joining us, you can enter your name if it's not already part of your ID there, and where you're calling from, where you're tuning in from today. And we will start the program in just a couple minutes or so. We're really excited to have an amazing panel and discussion today about policing and community responses around the world, particularly in Palestine, Kenya, Mexico, and the United States. And so we're really excited that you're going to be part of that. There'll be time for back and forth, for questions, for conversation. And we'll get a much broader perspective than I think almost any of us have had before. So again, if you're just joining us, please introduce yourself in the chat. You can open the chat box at the bottom of your screen. And I'll probably say this again, but if we will be having some of the presentation today in Spanish and some in English. So if you are joining us and don't speak both of those languages, you can click on the interpretation button, the globe at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and then choose either English or Spanish, whichever language you would like to hear. And when we get to that point, then you'll be able to hear everything in simultaneous interpretation. And we give a big shout out to our interpreters today, Ruth and Elena, who are working at top mental speed. So again, welcome everyone. I'm gonna just get us going here. My name is John Lindsay Poland, and I co-direct the Healing Justice Program in California of the American Friends Service Committee, and part of the American Friends Service Committee's Healing Justice team. I want to welcome people here, folks from Palestine, from California, from New Hampshire, from Chicago, from Floyd County, Virginia, from Pennsylvania, from California again, from the Republic of Brooklyn, from New Jersey. So welcome everyone, wherever you're tuning in from. We're going to have some of this in English and some of this in Spanish. So, lo voy a decir en español también una vez. Si quiere interpretación, hay un globo debajo de su pantalla de Zoom que dice interpretación. Ahí puedes escoger inglés o español, que es el idioma que quieres escuchar. So at the bottom of your screen is an interpretation icon, a globe, and you can choose to hear in English if that's your preferred language. We will have some of the presentation today in Spanish. If there are technical issues that you're experiencing with sound or the visual or any piece of the technical part, you can use the chat, which again is a icon on the bottom of your screen, and send a message to Summer, who is listed fairly near the top of your screen. It says Tech Support Summer, and Summer can help you out. Also, this program is being recorded, and in both in English and in Spanish, and we will be uploading this to the recording of this to afsc.org/CSBP, which I'll be coming back to. If you have questions during the presentations, feel free to put them in the chat as they occur to you, and we can raise them with our panel during that time. We will also have time for some questions and answers and conversation after the presentations. And so when that happens, you'll be able to raise your hand. Again, there's a raised hand function at the bottom of your screen where it says reactions. Then there's a thing there where you can raise your hand. That will be after the presentations when we invite more participation from everyone. This is part of a history of webinars for the last year and 4 months, initiated by American Friends Service Committee, called Community Safety Beyond Policing. And we've, in response to events in the United States and the long history of both police repression as well as organizing around policing issues in the United States, the series of webinars, which again you can find at afsc.org/CSBP, has treated a wide variety of issues on community safety, on police-free schools, on how to talk about community safety beyond policing with members of your community, on alternatives to dialing 911, in which Imani, one of our panelists today, spoke, on restorative justice and other ways to address conflict in our community, on policing and surveillance and how that plays out, on federal legislation related to policing in the United States, on police militarization, again, and organizing around it, on policing and white supremacy, on policing poverty and the economic issues that policing is often a function of, on police and law enforcement in prisons and in jails, on police and the war on terrorism. And yet, all of these were essentially focused on policing within the United States. And we knew that there's a big gap here because police play repressive and political and economic functions in countries throughout the world. Not all of those countries have the history of slavery and genocide out of which police grew in the United States. But I would add that the United States trains police and equips them in countries throughout the world, more than 100 countries. The United States also promotes missions for police in other countries, including border and migrant control and the drug war, which is expanding the function of policing in many other countries. A few years ago, in 2015 and 16, the US Congress, for the first time, mandated a report on United States training of police throughout the world, because there was no record, there was no single record of how the United States is training police throughout the world. And the report came back of more than 94,000 police trained in 2015 in more than 100 countries. There are also US and Israeli and other companies that sell weaponry and surveillance equipment to countries around the world. So we are linked in many different ways to the stories and the insights that you're about to hear today within the United States and between countries around the world. So we want to explore that today. Most of the information about police as a result of the secrecy in which police operate so often is actually, a lot of the information is in the experience of people and the organizing that happens in communities around the world. So we're going to hear more of that today. So I want to to introduce our panel, and we have asked each of them to talk about what is the experience of police in your community and what are communities doing to organize around those issues. So those are the two questions we've asked our guests, our panelists, to respond to. First, we're going to hear from Ann Rose, who is a trained journalist, a certified digital consultant, a youth and gender development expert who does communication for development in youth work and in digital spaces. Ann Rose's bio, she's played many different roles in Kenya. She's currently the executive director of the Uzalendo Africa Initiative, which is a Pan-African organization that works to transform leaders, does leadership development with constructive engagement on African values, on history, and on the Constitution, amplifying grassroots voices in local, regional, and international spaces, and is passionate about youth and women, their inclusion in governance and political accountability in human rights processes, and is also a human rights defender. After Anne, we will hear from Sahar Francis, who is a human rights attorney and the director of Adamir, which is Arabic for conscience. It's a prisoner support and human rights association in Palestine, a non-governmental civilian institution that works to support Palestinian political prisoners who are held in both Israeli and Palestinian prisons. It was established in 1991 by a group of activists focused on human rights, and offers legal aid to prisoners, does documentation and research, does advocacy and lobbying, particularly in the international arena, and has a training and awareness unit. Then we will hear from Andrea Rincon, who is a young woman from Tijuana, studied political science and public administration in the Autonomous University of Baja California, and founded the Border Youth Collective just a couple years ago at the beginning of the pandemic as an emergency humanitarian response for children. Andrea has worked for 6 years as a volunteer, has 4 years experience leading programs focused on education with a trauma care perspective in the Tijuana, San Diego area, and has also worked with organizations like Border Angels, the School Box Project, and a collective that advocates the application of legal tools to reduce police abuse. And Andrea will be speaking Spanish. Imani Henry will wind up with Imani, who founded Equality for Flatbush, which is an organization dedicated to documenting and resisting what it sees as unjust policies and practices impacting the neighborhood. Imani is a trained social worker and saw developing a series of pressures being applied to people in Flatbush, where he has lived for more than a decade. Equality for Flatbush was created as a direct response to the tenant and police harassment as a result of gentrification, and has as its goals to end the New York Police Department murders and to stop the displacement of low to middle income people in Brooklyn. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ann Rose. And welcome, Ann Rose. Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's much later in the day, in the evening for you. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, John, for the introductions. And yeah, it's crazy. It's 9 p.m. Nairobi time, but I know we're definitely gonna make it through. And I am glad that you give me this opportunity to share. And I'm also taking an opportunity to send a shout out to my network members at the East African Youth Peace and Security Network, where I chair. So yeah, first of all, it will be important for me to just give an overview of how the issue of community policing came to existence in Kenya. Now, for those of you who know about Kenya, there are specific areas that are usually targeted for radicalization and extremism: the coastal parts of Kenya and the northern parts of Kenya. So I happen to come from the coastal parts of Kenya, Mombasa to be specific. So then community policing is a citizen-centered approach for us because it emanated, from the community themselves, and everybody was like, oh, so there's Al-Shabaab. So, we can create a system where each one of us sort of knows our neighbors, where, community members can actually assist the local, police to patrol at night or even check out who's not a member of the neighborhood. And so this one was actually was put for preventing the issues of violent extremism, but also the issues of juvenile gang And I think after 1 month of trial, the government realized that it was indeed working. And so through the legislation, which was now the National Assembly, because in Kenya, the national security is the function of the national government. The way our governance system operates, we have the national government and the county government. So we have about 47 small governments and one bigger government. So when the National Assembly realized that the model was working, they put a policy for it, and it's called the National Police Service Act of 2011. This is where now community policing now became like an official thing for the police, and also the members who volunteered to be part of the community policing actually got recognition now from the government. So part of the reason why it was also formed is because we had issues of mistrust between young people and the police, especially during the times where radicalization was high. We also experienced a lot of police brutality. There was profiling. There's a way young people used to like a certain hairstyle that makes police think, oh, these are criminal. So community policing actually came to address such issues. And that is just one aspect of local security structures, because we have the community policing and the district peace committee, which is also an organ at the grassroots level. And then we have something called Nyumba Kumi in Swahili, which means 10 house, which is like devolvement of the community policing, where you say you have one community member patrolling 10 houses. So then how it often affects the community is that it makes safety and security a shared responsibility, whereby we all do it collectively. Like I cannot do it alone as Anne, so we have to do this. And so community policing also allows the community to work together to solve crime, disorders, and all these things, and also making the work of the police easy, but also improved community relations between the community and the police. Part of the challenge that people had with the community policing includes lack of mistrust with the information. And that's why, apart from just the community policing, through now the peace committees, there was an establishment of something called EWA. EWA is Early Warning, Early Response System, whereby this is a situation hub that a community member can send an anonymous text to a platform, and then it prompts the actor, who is the police, to actually act upon it. So we have something like a crowd map. So the crowd map will be showing where this call is coming from. So currently, community policing in Kenya is also organized under Nyumba Kumi, which I already told you, structures. And also there have been challenges actually. Still, we have, actually what I need to say is that these community policing members, first of all, are not paid. Okay, so they work absolutely 100% volunteerism, and what that means is then sometimes there is very little motivation, even though it was out of their own volition, for them to actually work. There is a bill that is currently lying in the parliament that has been lying there, I think, for about 2 years, that was talking about how do we compensate these people, especially in Kenya. You all know that we're going to an election, and this community policing do play a big role. So the other thing is about misconceptions about community policing because of formation of vigilantes. People actually think that some members don't have work to do. That's why they're doing community policing. But to a larger extent, I would say really it has worked, because it's more of when the police come to do the patrol, they don't know about these young people. And so if they're with the community policing, then they're able to know that, this one is not a criminal and whatnot. But then particularly inadequacies and capacity gaps in terms of institutionalization of now, because we constantly need to build their capacity, because remember, they are not full police. But one of the biggest development is that now it is structured in a way that, one, it's recognized by the government as a local security structure. But the other thing is that the civil society in Kenya, particularly those working around youth and peace, or peace and security, have built their capacity in a way that they actually conduct what we call station meetings at the police station together with the police, and now involve the community more. And then, okay, the issues of human rights violations also are there. But then they are trying to, learn every day, because change is gradual, change is a process. It's also important to mention that this model was tested in a neighboring country, Tanzania. And so when they realized it was working, and they decided then we are going to try and use this. And currently, the other East African country that are trying the model is Ethiopia, especially with the standoff that is currently going on in the country. So one thing though that I must say is that originally, young people were not part of community policing. And then, so it was the adults, and we are like, hey, wait, every time you talk about violence, you mention young people. Why are they not part of the community policing? And it's actually worse for young women, because then women and security, it's more of, looked from a masculine perspective because of the gender norm, gender constructions, where people think, women are not supposed to be in security. So I think part of the things that I did between 2018, 2017, I used to be cabinet secretary for security at a youth assembly. And part of what I did is really encouraging young women and young people to be part of community policing, which ideally wasn't the case, because it was a reserve for the adults. No, I don't mean the youth are not adults, but rather like older citizens who really come out of their own volition. So in terms of the model working, yes, it has worked to a certain extent, and there's so much to borrow from it. What we need to do now is actually strengthening and constantly building their capacity to be aware of the new dynamics or the new trends, including maybe how they can also use online platform to maybe help them detect, the criminals, etc. But also the other thing is about strengthening coordination between all these local security structures at the grassroots level, the district peace committee, the community policing, and the Nyumba Kumi, so that they speak in one language. At some point, they meet, especially when they're doing reporting for feedback through a platform called Uwiano. It's like an early warning platform where we all report like feedback. And so the other thing for me that I see could be improved now is in terms of how do we include other young people who necessarily may not be, part of the structures, but really want to learn or to volunteer their time, their energy and skill. I think that is pretty much what I can say in summary. Maybe, John, I could share with you, there is a document about community policing in Kenya and another document on community policing in Tanzania. I think it would be helpful to look at the model, the structures, and pretty much how it really connects and what people can learn from in terms of best practices. And then the last thing before I finish, I actually had finished, is also about them creating a common slogan, which usually I'm going to say it in Swahili and interpret. They say, ukiona sema, ukisikia sema. It's more of directly translate to if you see it, report, if you hear it, report. And so that's the slogan they've been using. And now during election time, we feel that it's really going to help. My only call really to the Kenyan government is to really give a commencement date to the bill that is currently lying at the National Assembly, so that these men and women who have volunteered their time, to serve the people can actually be compensated into small ways that can really motivate their lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anne-Rose. And yes, it will be great to see those resources about community policing in Kenya and Tanzania. Your presentation is so rich. It makes me think about self-defense community forces in Latin America, some of which have come out of indigenous communities, but some have been run by the government. So I have many questions, but hopefully we can come back to that. Now I want to turn to Sahar Francis to share with us about the work of Al-Amir and how you all are experiencing police, which are multiple forces of policing in Palestine, and what you all are the organizing you're doing. Thanks again so much for you are also in the late evening, so thank you so much.
So good afternoon, good evening. And thanks a lot for organizing this panel. It's really very important to do this comparisons and to see what is used by the different states under the name of the order to oppress and control more our communities. And as you said, Joan, here in Palestine, unfortunately, we have different layers of this oppression and control. So I would focus in two situations inside the state of Israel versus the Palestinian community, the Palestinian citizens of the state, that they suffer from the violence and brutality and violations of basic rights by the police. And the police and the army, the occupation forces, the security forces, the occupied territories, especially in East Jerusalem. And unfortunately, we have also the Palestinian Authority police and security service that they violate Palestinians' rights in the occupied territories. So it's not a secret to say that police inside the state was actually using security issues in order to justify and the war against terror and all these terminologies in order to violate and intensively actually attack the Palestinian community inside. In every opportunity, whenever we were demonstrating and demanding our rights inside the state of Israel, whether in relation to house demolitions, land confiscation, and other rights that the state didn't recognize for the Palestinians, citizens in the state, we were facing lots of police violence and brutality in attacking these demonstrations. And already in 1976, they killed 6 demonstrators that in the Land Day in the 30th of March every year, have the memory of these 6 martyrs. Later in 2000, when they were attacking the demonstrations in support of the break of the Second Intifada in the occupied territories, they killed 13 demonstrators. The main problem inside that there's no accountability. In the 2000 events, there was a professional investigation committee, a ministerial committee that was founded by the Israeli government in order to investigate, and they ended up without finding police accountable of the 13 martyrs from the Palestinian community inside the state. Between 2000 and 2021, actually last May, when they used lots of violence against the Palestinian demonstrators, lots of things happened on the level of the internal violence in the Palestinian community, and the police has a huge role in this. Like there is a serious increase in the criminal issues, the internal violence in the Palestinian side of the state. And this is intentional because after the events of 2000, the government and the officials in Israel decided to affect the Palestinian society in a way to make it more busy with the internal violence and not focusing on the political issues and with Palestinians in the occupied territories. So they allowed weapons, illegal weapons, to be reaching the villages and the Palestinian cities. They're not investigating properly all the criminal cases and the use of these weapons. There is daily attacks internally in the Palestinian villages. Every year we have more than 100 people would be shot and killed in criminal cases without any investigation from the police. And this affects seriously the health of the whole community in the in East more even complicated because they supposed to be considered according to the international law part of the occupied territories. But as you know, Israel treated East Jerusalem as the capital part, United Jerusalem, the capital of the state of Israel, and they imposed the Israeli law. So again, the Palestinian residents in East Jerusalem, they would face also the regular police, but mainly as well the security forces, the intelligence, and all the like arrest, imprisonment based on ideological motivation actions, which leads to, of course, convictions and imprisonment for long years and considered to be security prisoners, as well against the Palestinian people in the occupied territories. And there is details. I don't think we have enough time to enter to all the violations that the police and the security service would use against the Palestinian people. But I think it's very important to highlight the issue of the surveillance, because currently there's a huge scandal in the state of Israel about the NSO company, the spyware that was used. First, we discovered that in our context as Palestinian NGOs, like in our organization as Addameer, for example, back in October, we discovered our lawyers, they were using the spyware against him since 1 year, and other colleagues from other organizations like Al-Haq and Bisan Center. Actually, these are 3 of the 6 organizations that last October were designated as terrorist organizations. 3 days after we discovered that there is spyware used against our employees, the Israeli Minister of Security declared us as terrorist organizations. Of course, this is in order to silence us, in order to affect our work. And since then, we are trying to face this development. And we also were declared as illegal organizations by the military governor, the responsible territories. On the other hand, there's also the problematic of the police and the security service under the Palestinian Authority, because unfortunately, Palestinian Authority is committed so far for these security arrangements and intelligence sharing with the Israeli forces, and they are abiding themselves as well for all these concepts of fighting terrorism, and this has caused lots of internal complications. Those who were opposing the PA policies. And it caused that the Palestinian Authority arrested hundreds and thousands of Palestinian activists. But allow me to highlight what happened in 2021 after the Palestinian, actually he was supposed to be elected if we would have the election last May. Nizar Banat, a very well-known Palestinian political activist, that he was killed while under arrest security forces. And unfortunately, the investigation ended with just following the 13 police personnel and security personnel who came to the house to arrest him without any connections, whether there was a higher or not. And this is demonstrations on the local street in different cities. And the police was attacking these demonstrations very violently. And it was including not just physical violence, but sexual harassment, unfortunately. This is just shows that there is a serious problem, because I mean, like, imagine Palestinian people who were suffering a lot from the violence and violations by the Israeli forces. We violate our own people, use more same techniques of torture and ill treatment in our police station. This is just proof that there is a consensus and there is sharing experiences in between police and in between intelligence and in between groups in the world, in the United States, in Israel, in other Latin American countries, in Africa, in the Arab world, that they use the same techniques, they use the same tools in order to oppress people. And this is why it's very important for us to join efforts and trace these policies. So in our context as a Palestinian organization that follows prisoners' issues, Ad-Damir was in contact with lots of international organizations, whether in the United States or in Latin America, and some especially in other countries, in order to develop joint campaigns or sharing information and raising awareness about what's the tools that these police and intelligence are using against us and how we face it. One of these models, I think, is the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign that we used, for example, against a security company that was working in some of the Israeli, that yes, the Danish British security company that actually was also acting in other countries, in the UK, in South Africa, and I'm sure they present in the United States as well, and they are involved in human rights violations. So boycotting such companies or programs, Pegasus, for example, and the NSO company, and every technology or tool that is used in order to oppress and control the people, we should develop joint strategies to face it. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Sahar. So much complexity. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. There's already actually one in the chat for you. We'll come back to that. Next, I'd like to turn to Andrea Rincon. For those of you who are listening in English, Andrea will be presenting in Spanish. If you would like to hear the simultaneous interpretation, you can click on the interpretation globe at the bottom of your Zoom screen and click on English to hear the interpretation into English. Andrea, welcome, and we look forward to hearing from the reality from Tijuana.
Muchas gracias, Jen. Thank you very much. Hi to everyone. And yeah, I'm going to make this in Spanish. I think it's going to be more easy for me to explain. Voy a presentarles un mi nombre es Andrea Rincón, soy activista, vivo aquí en la ciudad de Tijuana, que en realidad es un territorio ocupado de la comunidad Kumeyaay, desde allá, una comunidad indígena, es un pueblo originario, y bueno, aquí se asentó la ciudad de Tijuana, y yo les voy a hablar sobre el abuso policíaco y las detenciones arbitrarias en esta frontera, particularmente Tijuana, un poco de contexto, es la frontera, está con esta frontera en la ciudad de San Diego, en Estados Unidos. San Diego, pues, es uno de los estados más importantes que tiene Estados Unidos y que es el destino para muchas personas que están solicitando asilo humanitario o refugio. En mi caso, yo trabajo temas de migración, trabajo concretamente con jóvenes y niños migrantes que están aquí en nuestra ciudad y que buscan ya sea quedarse aquí o llegar a Estados Unidos. Hoy en día la migración dejó de ser como antes lo habíamos conocido en México, ¿no? Antes lo veíamos como este hombre mexicano que cruzaba a Estados Unidos sin documentos para trabajar allá y enviar dinero a su familia. La realidad es que a partir de 2016, para la fecha, todo esto cambió rotundamente. En 2016 llegó una caravana de personas de Haití que estaban buscando asilo o refugio aquí en Tijuana y en Estados Unidos por esta crisis sanitaria y política por la que estaban viviendo. Y bueno, en 2018 llega también una caravana de Centroamérica que fue internacionalmente pues algo muy importante para, no solamente para nuestro país y para Estados Unidos, sino que a nivel global. Si bien es cierto que el Estado mexicano pues goza de su plena soberanía para establecer las políticas que se encargan de emitir la regulación en materia migratoria, también debemos de tomar en cuenta que nos tenemos que ajustar como país o como Estado a las obligaciones que hemos contraído en los tratados internacionales, que están sumamente enfocados y con esta intención de velar y de abogar por la protección de los derechos humanos de quienes son las personas más vulnerables alrededor del mundo, que son estas personas que están en situación migratoria o de movilidad. En este caso en concreto, a mí me gustaría contarles nuestra experiencia con la Policía Municipal, dando como ejemplo lo que sucedió con las caravanas de 2018 hasta la fecha. Y bueno, lo que les compartía es que cuando llegan esta caravana migrante de personas de Centroamérica que recorrieron todo el país mexicano, desde el sur hasta el norte, que es Tijuana, el gobierno municipal de Tijuana dirigieron un mensaje a la sociedad de manera pública, en donde decían que iban a tener cero tolerancia hacia las personas migrantes, enfatizando que únicamente aquellos migrantes que se portaran bien iban a ser bienvenidos a Tijuana y aquellos que no serían remitidos o enviados al Instituto Nacional de Migración para su respectiva deportación. Esto, sin duda, fue una declaración sumamente grave y que orilló a que mucha de la población de Tijuana comenzara a hacer manifestaciones en contra de las personas migrantes que estaban llegando aquí a nuestra ciudad, haciendo movimientos no tan grandes, pero sí muy graves, en contra de este derecho humano que es el migrar. Y bueno, pues Tijuana es la ciudad que tiene el mayor número de estancias en la frontera y por otro lado, pues también tiene un flujo muy grande de migración interna. En los estados del sur de México, muchas de las familias están teniendo que dejar sus estados por el narcotráfico o por la persecución de sicarios o de pandillas. Y en el caso de las personas que vienen de Centroamérica, es la misma historia. El narcotráfico y las pandillas, además de la pobreza y las crisis políticas que tienen, les han orillado a tener que dejar absolutamente todo. Dejan todo lo que construyeron y tuvieron alguna vez para buscar una oportunidad, no solamente de tener una vida mejor o digna, sino una oportunidad de vida. Y eso es la gravedad en la que nos encontramos las organizaciones aquí en la frontera. Que estas personas estaban simplemente huyendo porque no querían ser asesinadas, porque no querían que su familia fuera asesinada. Y a mí en particular, que trabajo con niños y niñas, escuché historias terribles donde estos menores habían presenciado el asesinato de muchos de sus familiares, ¿no? A manos de las pandillas. Y donde también en muchas de esas ocasiones, pues también las autoridades gubernamentales estaban involucradas. Y bueno, toda esta situación que ocurrió con el presidente municipal y todos estos discursos también de odio y de xenofobia, propiciaron la securitización y el abuso policíaco de las autoridades, tanto locales, estatales y nacionales. También en la accesibilidad a los servicios médicos, alimentos y vivienda temporal, como es los albergues o los espacios de acogida, se vieron sobrepasados, ya que aquí en Tijuana quienes ofrecen este refugio humanitario a las personas son organizaciones de la sociedad civil. Son muchos albergues que antes eran iglesias y que se convirtieron en estos espacios seguros para las personas, cuando en realidad pues es un trabajo del que también se debería de encargar nuestro gobierno. Los servicios jurídicos o la atención legal estuvo siendo proporcionada y está actualmente todavía siendo proporcionada por organizaciones, sobre todo de Estados Unidos, que vienen aquí a Tijuana a llevar los casos de asilo humanitario de las personas. Y bueno, esta imagen habla mucho, ¿no?, de la situación aquí en Tijuana. Las personas migrantes, ante el desespero de no tener una respuesta y al no estar seguros aquí en México, comenzaron a hacer manifestaciones cerca de la garita. Lo que pueden ver ahí al fondo es el muro fronterizo entre México y Estados Unidos, en particular entre Tijuana y San Diego. Y estos fueron violentados por la policía municipal de aquí, de Tijuana, y no únicamente de aquí, sino que también el CBP o el Border Patrol del lado de Estados Unidos, al ver todo este movimiento, comenzó a lanzar bombas al lado mexicano, ¿no? Por eso esta imagen ha sido tan importante a través del trabajo que hemos estado realizando y que hemos estado compartiendo, ¿no? Cómo es que estas familias y todos estos jóvenes y personas se han visto agredidos y violentados en sus derechos humanos. De ahí es que nace el colectivo del que soy parte, que es el colectivo 1597. La Asociación Civil Alma Migrante y su equipo de litigio ganaron un juicio de amparo contra el abuso de poder de la Policía Municipal en Tijuana. En esta sentencia se revela que las autoridades municipales o la Policía Municipal entrega indebidamente a migración a las personas extranjeras que detiene. Es decir, aquí en México, la Policía Municipal no puede detener de manera arbitraria a una persona migrante y pedirle su documentación. Es decir, ¿sí, Jen?
Andrea, la presentación no está funcionando, los slides no están avanzando. Entonces, no sé si sería lo mismo.
Ahí, por ejemplo, se ve cuando se mueven.
No, para mí no. Hay comentarios que no.
Ok. Bueno, esta era la imagen de la que les mencionaba, donde hubo una manifestación y, bueno, toda la explicación que ya les di, como para que tengan mayor contexto. Y bueno, así es como surge este colectivo, gracias a esta asociación que llevó este juicio de amparo y generó esta herramienta jurídica que es la sentencia 1597, donde un juez federal dice que es ilegal e inconstitucional que un policía municipal detenga a una persona migrante y después la lleve al Instituto Nacional de Migración para que le deporten. También el amparo de Tijuana protege el derecho a saber cuál es el trato que la ley indica a los migrantes en México. Es un juicio en defensa del derecho de Tijuana a recibir información que promueva el cumplimiento de la ley. Esto a raíz de las declaraciones que hizo el presidente municipal, donde menciona que si los migrantes se portan mal, van a ser deportados. Cuando las personas migrantes están aquí en Tijuana, claro que puede haber faltas administrativas y ellos pues tienen que seguir como un proceso, pero no por ello tienen que ser deportados. El colectivo está conformado por distintas organizaciones como es Pueblos Sin Fronteras, AFCC, Border Youth, Alma Migrante y Casa de Oración del Migrante. Las acciones que hacemos en concreto para evitar estos abusos policíacos o en caso de que ya haya sucedido, pues actuar contra esta acción es monitorear a la Policía Municipal y al Instituto Nacional de Migración, así como también seguimos los casos de las personas migrantes que han sido detenidas de esta manera injusta y llevamos sus casos a través de quejas o denuncias, que es todo un proceso en el cual pues el colectivo se ha estado informando. Y bueno, en estas fotografías lo que podemos ver es el reflejo de cómo la Policía Municipal detiene a las personas simplemente por su apariencia física, por la manera en que hablan o porque están deambulando y ellos, es algo que pasa mucho aquí, tienen que tener números o un récord de cuántas personas detienen al día o a la semana y por ello es que estas personas son detenidas, ¿no? Y después enviadas al Instituto Nacional de Migración, a sabiendas de que este instituto sabe también que pues es ilegal que la policía municipal funja como un agente de migración, ¿no? Entonces, es una situación bastante, que se estaba convirtiendo en una situación bastante grave porque estábamos copiando o adaptando este sistema de Estados Unidos, ¿no? Está el Border Patrol o la Policía Fronteriza y ellos tienen otras facultades que en el caso de México no las teníamos. Nosotros no tenemos a personas, no tenemos estos cuerpos de seguridad en nuestra frontera que están cuidando que todo el tiempo, que están cuidando constantemente que la gente no cruce o no llegue a nuestro país. Pero por todas estas declaraciones es que se empezó a hacer esto, además de las amenazas del gobierno de Donald Trump, donde decía que iba a subir los aranceles si el gobierno mexicano no detenía estas movilizaciones migratorias.
Ajá. Si podemos volver a estas cuestiones, porque queremos escuchar de Imani. Se ve que en Tijuana está replicando los, I'm sorry, I should speak in English now, where we can see how in Tijuana the same patterns of policing focused on migrants who are just seeking asylum are being replicated and amplified. We'll come back to this. I think the segue here is also that police focus on poor people who don't have resources. And that takes place whether people are migrating and seeking asylum or whether they are in a community that is being gentrified. So with that, we'll turn to Imani and hope that we have a few minutes also to talk more with Andrea, as well as with Sahar and Anne. So take it away, Imani. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, John, for the translation.
Oh, sorry, keep going.
Sí, y sí, solamente para cerrar, les invitamos a que puedan escanear este código donde van a conocer el trabajo que hacemos en cada organización.
It's 2014. There was a man that was fully on the floor, arms stretched out, that was shot in the back. There was a child, an infant actually, that they threw the flash grenade. But that's war. These are war tools that they threw a flash grenade. It's lethal, but they threw it into this child's into the bed that this child was sleeping in, burned their face and their chest. And I think that's the piece of it. We've talked about even when they go in around people with emotional distress, which is very large cases of that is very prevalent. I think the statistic nationally has been about 70% that there have been cases around folks that are either dealing with physical or mental health issues that they're targeted by the police. We just lost someone, again, beginning of January, Edith Pierre, who again, they went through, and this person was in emotional distress. We don't know, it was a dark night. But the main piece of it, that he had a gun, he had a knife, It was suicide by cop. All of these terminations that the police use, what I like to call cop propaganda, to really like justify their use of like lethal force against Black and brown people, against people with mental health conditions. So that, you know, and again, with the understanding that like, again, we've documented and heard of stories where literally the police walk in, guns ready, with shields ready, and like a neighbor opens the door to see what's going on in the building and she's shot. And these are the kind of things we could just go on, and I don't want to, you know, I'm gonna stay focused because we could just go off on all the ways the police, all the incredibly insidious ways that the police attack our communities. So I want to talk a little bit about fighting back, because one of the things that I think is also really important, what's good is just happened in Minneapolis, that there is now a moratorium on you know, no-knock warrants. And this has been something that's been discussed over and over. Philadelphia, you know, all over the country. This is not a new discussion about no-knocks, right? But I think the thing about, you know, that there is this, like, now there's a growing consciousness. And that's why I sort of talked about, like, going from a time, you know, where I'm a generation that, like, helped to coin the term racial profiling in the United States, to watch now folks talk about abolition. I just would like with some radical history here, talking about abolish the cops, or even defund the cops. I just want to also say, so I'm going to touch on defund the cops really quickly. I think the main piece is that people have acted like, you know, in 2020, I'll talk about 2020. In 2020, there was an effort, a vote, it was brought to like an election period, a vote around defunding the police in Minneapolis. It did not pass. And there's all of this drama, oh, the defund the police movement, you know, it's lowered, it's not happening. I want to just, again, maintain, this is not a new idea. I mean, I'm an anti-war activist, you know, I could just want to just go, like, we've been talking about this forever. We always compare, this is like decades of comparing what is the federal, you know, state, city budgets for education, healthcare, social services versus the inflated, incredible budget for police and policing. We chant, you know, money for jobs and education, not for war and occupation. It's been a thoroughly, you know, it's been like, it's not a unique thing. It's been happening for decades. So when people act like, whoa, this is an idea, this is radical, it's not. And it's still going on, that people will continue to say, look, you're spending all this money and on the things that on the police, which we don't need, but all the things that we do need, you spend so little. I want to just flip into New York really quick for this reason, is about the fact that we now have a former cop, Eric Adams, and if people have not looked at Saturday Night Live's skit with Chris Reed about Eric Adams, I really encourage, I might put it in the link, you should watch it. Because for those of us that lived in Brooklyn, New York, we've been fighting him forever when he was the borough president. Now he's the mayor. As people know, last week, Biden came to meet with Eric Adams, a former cop, who is right now, like, we're fighting, right, you know, that he wants to do facial recognition, which so many studies, so many documentaries, so many news articles have shown how this is not an effective tool to find people, to find quote unquote criminals, you know, or i.e. Black people, brown people, working class people. You know, let's be real. But the other piece of it, that it set a tone in the country. They came to New York, Biden came to New York, the most militarized police force in the United States, and then said, we're gonna do this, we need to stop, you know, gun violence. You know, that's what we have to do, this crackdown, which means more police in our neighborhoods. I want to maintain, like, if people were able to live and have all their basic needs covered, live comfortable lives, and like feel like they could live in a joyful place, we would see a decrease of gun violence. It's because of the lack of racial and economic justice in the United States. And we can talk about LGBTQ, we can go on, women, because of all these injustices at the root problem why we see gun violence. So to have this now be like, this is now like setting the stage. We're already fighting, we were fighting in the de Blasio administration before Edgar added the whole thing about new guns that were easier to fire. We don't need to just cock them back, right? We need you to almost not put your hand on the trigger to fire these guns. And then last but not least, I just want to talk about 2020, because this was a global uprising and rebellion that happened. And I think this is the most important thing about no matter how many obstacles that are put in our way as people, how many injustices we face, we rise up. This is how we won the 8-hour day, workday. This is how we have won. We talk about so many different injustices that happen in the United States and globally, is when people fight back and people rise up. 2020 saw, in the wake of George Floyd, saw folks like all the, I have folks that were on trial for pulling down a Confederate statue in Durham, North Carolina, apologies. And I think I'm going to wrap up. I think that's a piece of it, to see things like actually all the Confederacy, all the state in different parts of the country coming down, being burnt down. The statue of Rizzo in Philadelphia, the epitome of bigotry against folks in the civil rights movement coming down. So I will end with this. I am so for any tactic, any strategy that people use to get back and fight back for justice, all the ways that we show solidarity with each other. I feel like legislative work is important. I feel like community interventions are incredibly important. And I also think it's always, when we look at direct action and political unrest, things change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Imani. So many connections, so much good energy, and really laying out how community organizing is. It's really about power, right? It's about community power and addressing the power of policing. Your discussion about weaponry in California and American Friends Service Committee, we are documenting the weaponry that police are obtaining, and it is very toxic. It's really toxic information. We know it's happening in a lot of other places. We are going to wrap up in a little while, a little bit at past, and there were a couple questions that came up in the chat, particularly for Sahar. And I know it's getting late for Sahar, and want to be able to give Sahar a chance to respond. After that, I'd love to hear if any of the panelists have questions for each other, or if any of you who are attending have any questions or even responses. You can put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand from the reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So Jim asked for Sahar. Jim asked, how would HB 2590, which I confess I don't know what that legislation is, affect repression of Palestinians? And Julie asked, I think kind of puzzled, how can the Palestinian Authority be working with the Israeli government? How does that work? How did that come about? Sahar, are you able to address either of those questions?
So I'm sorry, I'm also not familiar with the HB. Can explain more what he mean. I thought he was asking about the security company I mentioned. It's G4S though. And also HP, there's a campaign against HP as involved as well with security technologies that is used in the wall, in the separation wall. And I assume it's in the also in the United States context, in the also in the wall that Rhea mentioned between Mexico and the United States. So I totally agree with Imani that the joint work, the joint campaigns, if we can, the people have the power to affect training programs, developing joint for operation experiences, weapon trades, and so on. And this is what we need to do. On the PA question, I think since the establishment of the PA, it was the OC meant all this issue of security coordination between the PA and the Israeli government, and not just bilateral, but in the regional level between the United States and other Arab countries and Israel and Turkey and all this formation. And this is continuous. So whenever, like just a couple of days ago, the Israeli security secret forces entered to Nablus city, and they assassinated 3 Palestinian people. They claimed they were involved in militant attack. In such cases, they would request the Palestinian police just to disappear. So they inform them that they are coming, but they never tell them what they are coming to do. So of course, there's daily sharing information on the security.
In the chat, there's some description about this legislation, HB 2590, which requires the Israeli government to recognize the human rights of Palestinians as a condition for U.S. aid to Israel. Wondering what you think about that, but also I've often thought that we should have a similar thing within the United States, that police who in cities and counties where police are violating the rights of Black and brown communities, that federal aid to those cities and counties should be conditioned on eliminating those violations. But do you have any sense of how that would affect Palestine?
I'm not sure if it's really affecting, because at the end of the day, if you review all the Israeli practices, they're not respecting any of the Palestinian human rights. And this was all these decades with the support of the United States and unfortunately other big countries. If Israel was founded really accountable to respect international law and the rights of the Palestinian people, we wouldn't be in such circumstances today. So I think it's not really implementing the accountability on the perpetrators.
Thank you so much. I do invite anyone who has a question to raise your hand if you like. I'll be able to see your raised hand, or put your question in the chat. I do have wonder if any of the panelists have questions for each other, or anything you want to add after listening to each other.
John, can I go?
Yes, please, Anne-Rose.
Sure. So I really don't have questions per se, but it's more of a comment. First of all, I would like to say that all the presentations were quite insightful. And then I also wanted to agree with the situation of Palestine and how community-driven approaches could work, and also joint efforts could work. But then the last thing that I wanted to say is that the last presenter, who is Imani, that presentation was really, really powerful.
You're breaking up.
Especially because it talks about things that we could relate to, even though we don't live where he is, especially when he started talking about police brutality and giving narrations in terms of what really has happened. And if we remember the other presentation about the second person who presented after me, talked about connecting the dots or connecting the methods or ways through which police brutality happens between transnational countries, Africa and Palestine and any other parts of the world. It's like it's a similar trend and pattern. And so that is what I wanted to say, especially Imani's presentation almost made me shed a tear, especially when he talked about Floyd. I thought that was so powerful though. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Anne-Rose. We know these connections are so important for communities around the world to keep organizing and being inspired and learning from each other. Any other comments from any of the other panelists today? It seems to, Sahar, go ahead, yes.
I wanted to share also Anne-Rose with her notes, because when Andrea was showing the pictures, Annie was talking about the police not knocking and coming after midnight and in the early morning. It's like without putting the United States and Mexico, I could thought that it's taking place in Palestine because it's the same. And this is why it's very important and they are trained on the same strategies. And this is why we have to face them in the same strategies and to develop, of course, taking in consideration each one his own context. But I think has of them in order to force these governments to stop violating our rights and and attacking our communities.
So well said, Sahar. There's so much trauma created here, and we know that the changes that need to be made are so profound. It's not just about reforming the system. Like you're saying, if they were going to have Israelis really recognize the rights of Palestinians, then there would be no U.S. aid to Israel. It just wouldn't exist. So want to conclude, and so give Imani and Andrea the last word here. Imani, go ahead.
I just want to, I thank you all. This has been a really amazing. I just want to talk about solidarity just in general. I think that's the piece of it. Like I just posted a 2017 Muslim ban action that happened at an airport in the United States. And they were chanting, I believe that we will win. I believe, which a lot of people think of, from the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think it's just like, the same way that we talk about the militarization in the US, that is, the same gas. I'm so sorry, I'm having a brain block right now, but the same weaponry that they use in Palestine is developed in the United States. And basically it's like a training ground to do whatever to US folks. And the same thing, I just wanted to just say, like, during the Black Lives Matter movement for this time, I love all the levels of solidarity that people have been showing and using and tactics we're using, and it just makes it like the world is a smaller place because we are fighting together. That we do see Black Lives Matter movements in Africa, that we do see Black Lives Matter activism and anti-police brutality activism happening in like Central America. It's beautiful. I just want to wrap up and say that it's an honor to be with you all, and it just reminds me of why solidarity is so important.
Thank you so much, Imani. It's so true. Solidarity, we express it with people different from us and people similar to us, people who are close and people who are far, people who are in very different, diverse situations, and it's so critical to survival and to really living. Andrea, you want to offer any last words to us?
Yeah, of course. So I'm going to follow the line of Imani, and I think that's why we start with this collective. It's because we want to spread the word to the people here in Tijuana. We want to tell them that it's not normal that the police is acting like this way, and it's not normal that our government is violating our human rights. And also because the local police also make these practices with the citizens. So it's something that it's growing, and we want to tell the people like, okay, we are activists, or we are nonprofits or organizations, but you also can, like join, because we can do this work by ourselves, right? That's why we need to create this community, create this solidarity. And I think that's why it's very important, the work that everyone here it's doing in their own communities, in their own countries. And thank you for this space to talk and to share, because we really need to do this, and not just into like organizations or collectives. We need to spread the word with the people outside and tells them like, okay, you can be also an activist, you can be also part of this movement, and you can change the situation, because we are not heroes and we can do this by ourselves. So yeah, thank you to everyone.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Mil gracias. We forged the path together. It takes many of us, and those connections are so crucial as we go forward. So want to make one final invitation. We are an AFSC organizing some study and action cohorts on for community safety beyond policing. There's 3 study action cohorts that will be starting in the next month and a half. One focused on youth and police abolition, a second focused on alternatives to dialing 911 for responding to emergencies, and a third that is focused on restorative justice and practices of restorative justice. You can find registration for those, and we encourage people to, these will be 8-week, between 3 and 8 weeks, depending on the 3. And so we encourage you to go to afsc.org/CSBP and join us in this committed work, because as Andrea said, it comes from us, right? We're doing this. We have to create it. It comes from the community. We're not asking the police to come in and provide our own security and our safety. So thank you so much to Anne Rose, to Sahar, to Andrea, to Imani, to all of you, to the tech people, to Elena and Ruth, who did language interpretation. And we will be seeing you on the next time. Thanks. Good afternoon and good night.
Thank you. Thank you all.